Okay, we're recording. So if you don't want to have your video showing, then you can turn your camera off. Otherwise, keep it on because we'd love to see your face. There will be a few links in the chat if you want to check out how to get onto our e-news list or make a donation or otherwise stay in touch with us. We'd love to have you check those links out. Okay, our speaker today is Bill Raney, one of the founders of the Society for Masonboro Island and one of the co-founders of the Coastal Land Trust. Now retired attorney, Bill has long been a champion for our environment, as evidenced by his passion for helping to save beautiful places like Masonboro. Bill, thank you so much for being here today and sharing the story of the Society for Masonboro Island with us. Take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Am I on, Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I see some nods in the crowd out there. Thank you all for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. I hope I don't embarrass you. I appreciate everybody joining the little lunch lecture today, and I'll just get right to the meat of the story. Stephanie has already told you about a little bit of my background, and I think she's gonna, yeah, there she goes. We're showing some pictures now, so you don't have to watch me during this whole thing. I know that there are some members, some people that are participating today that were involved in the efforts, and if any of you have different recollections of any of this, I hope you'll tune into the chat and let Stephanie know, and we can cover those at the end of the presentation. I think it's helpful to understand the work of the Society to know a little bit first about the geography and the prior acquisition efforts before the Society was formed. Until about 1952, Masonboro Island was connected to Carolina Beach. And in 1952, Carolina Beach Inlet was created, which makes Masonboro Island, made Masonboro Island about what it is today. Masonboro Inlet has existed more or less in its current location since the early 1800s. So that end of the island has been pretty stable throughout from colonial times until now. There was another inlet that was fairly prominent in the middle of the island called Cabbage Inlet. You'll see some references to that in some of the names that you see on maps. That was just about straight across from Whiskey Creek. Masonboro Inlet, even though it's been more or less in its location that it is today, has been located as far south as the turn in Mason Channel, about 4,000 feet or so south of the jetty. So even during my lifetime, and some of you other old timers out there, you may remember when Masonboro Inlet was actually quite a bit further south than it is now. There have been a couple of small inlets that have kind of come and gone with storms down towards the Carolina Beach end, where the inlet, or excuse me, where the island is narrow and subject to overwash, but those usually fill in pretty quickly. As far as the history of the prior one, and I don't know the entire history of maybe of prior efforts, but the one notable one was in the mid-70s. There was actually creation of Masonboro Island State Park by legislation. That was before there was actually any acquisition of land out there. So it was prospective as far as the legislation was concerned, but there was an appropriation of funds for the study, the initial research, surveys, title searches, that sort of thing. and ultimately for acquisition. The first stage of that process was successful, and that was the acquisition of a large tract at Snow's Cut, which has now become Carolina Beach State Park. That was going to be the mainland base for access to Masonboro Island once it became state park. There were title searches done. I think at that point there was a recognition that this was going to be a very involved, complex, expensive process because, as I suspect most of you know, there were 80 plus tracts of land, most of which were owned by multiple owners. So it became apparent pretty quickly that it was going to be a huge project. There was some success in that 1970s process. And Stephanie, if you could cue up that map, I can reference that. And those of you that are seeing this may be able to manipulate and enlarge that map. I know at the scale that it's showing on your screen now, you probably can't read anything, but there are 3 tracts close to the south end that were acquired during that early process. And I don't know whether you can see my cursor or not, but they were in this stretch of the island right here. Actually, maybe as far up as here.
We can't see your cursor, but would that be on the left side or the right side of? Would it be?
It would be kind of in the middle. You'll see the track that's kind of in bold. Looks like it's got some bold lines around it. That's the one that's more or less in the middle of the 3 that were acquired. I think all 3 of them have black circles showing up in the orange. Yeah. So there was some success in the early part of this effort. And I think a lot of the effort was actually probably the product of Addison Hewlett, who was, his family gives its name to Hewlett Street. And it was a very prominent and successful lawyer and politician. He was Speaker of the House Representatives in North Carolina in the 1970s. And I suspect, although I can't confirm this, that he was the person behind this initial effort to make Masonboro Island a state park. Somebody else out there may have more information about that. Once he became or left the speakership, I think this project kind of dwindled. As I mentioned, it became very apparent that it was going to be very expensive and complicated, and the will just didn't seem to be there. There didn't seem to be any real grassroots support at the local level that I'm aware of to process going. So it just kind of went away. And of course, what remained was renamed from Masonboro State Park to Carolina Beach State Park. And one other acquisition that's of significance was one that was made in 1978. New Hanover County acquired the property at the very extreme north end in connection. And I'm not even sure whether that shows on the map. It probably does. I think it shows up as state of North Carolina, parcel 1 on the map. That was acquired by the county in order to fulfill its obligation to provide the local share and the property rights necessary to build the South Jetty at Mason. Proved to be very helpful. Addison Hewlett, who was kind of the family lawyer for all these families that were owners on the north end, put together a affidavit and a lot of transactions to do some various swaps among those family members that own the northern 2 or so miles of the island to make that possible. And that ended up being a very helpful document in trying to figure out who owned what up there. The next step, that's a little bit of the past history. The society's involvement really starts in 1983. In the summer of 1983, there was an advertisement in the Star News for a lot for sale on Masonboro Island. It was placed by Irvin Hewlett, who was another one of the Hewlett family members and was in the real estate business. That caught, I think, most people by surprise. Masonboro, during the lifetime of anybody that was around in 1983, had always been like it is, and with the exception of a few little fishing shacks, there had never been any development out there. It had been effectively used as a park by the public for hundreds of years, and this seemed to be something that caught most people by surprise. One of the people that it caught by surprise was Edith Friedberg. She was a Riceville Beach resident, an environmental activist, and had been involved in another effort in the early 70s at Riceville Beach to try to stop high-rise development on Riceville Beach. And I had some involvement with her during that project. She mobilized people that she felt were going to be interested in this and might be able to provide some help in the effort to prevent any sort of development on Masonboro Island. Among the people, the early people that she contacted were Van Reed, who was a longtime resident of Masonboro and a recently retired executive director of the New Hanover or Wilmington Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure what it was called. And Karen Jacoby, who was active in local politics, later became a representative in the North Carolina House from this area. And the four of us, I guess, and a few others started brainstorming this, and became apparent pretty quickly that it was going to be a pretty big project, although we didn't understand how big at the time, but we felt like it would be a good idea to incorporate, which we did. We debated the name, we really couldn't think of anything that seemed great, and somebody thought of the idea of Society for Masonboro Isle, which would, nobody called it Masonboro Isle, obviously, but we thought that might be a catchy acronym that could be the acronym could be SMILE. Well, SMILE never caught on, so we continued just to be the Society or the Society for Masonboro Island. We recruited other board members, some of whom I suspect are on this call, and we may get a chance to, if you'll identify yourself in the chat box, we might be able to get around to recognizing some of you at the end of this. As I said, I think we didn't fully understand the significance of what we were taking on, but it became apparent pretty quickly. And I was thinking that, all these owners out there had just been sitting on this property, paying a few dollars in taxes for all these years, knowing that it was kind of used by the public and never any attempts to do any sort of development or keep the public off or anything, and that they would welcome the chance to get a little tax break by donating or selling at a bargain price their property out there. Well, after we were making initial contacts and getting some recognition in the press about our efforts, the phone was not ringing and our initial contacts were not bearing any fruit. It turned out that almost all of these people that owned out there were people with modest means and really could care less about any sort of tax breaks. They didn't necessarily want to get rich off of it, but they wanted to be compensated for their interest. And of course, we didn't have any money, so it was a little difficult to get started that way. And we finally got a few out of the literally hundreds of owners out there. A few, mostly old timers, kind of stepped up and said, I like it the way it is, and I hope you'll protect it, and I'll either give you or sell you my interests. A lot of times it was just a 1/84th of a 100-foot lot, so it was not a lot. It didn't involve a lot of money, and it was within our ability. So we made a few little partial acquisitions in the very early stages, the first year or so. The effort was significantly bolstered, and what became the kind of the key to the success of the project was when the state proposed this for inclusion as a component of the North Carolina, what was then called the North Carolina Estuarine Sanctuary, or the National Estuarine Sanctuary. It later became National Estuarine Research Reserve. With that came not only participation by the state, but also federal money as part of that project, too, part of inclusion in the National Estuarine Research Reserve. So suddenly there was a source of funds. It was still going to be obviously a complicated project, but our efforts then kind of changed into more of a supporting role for the state's acquisition. We still served a very useful purpose in being able to quickly acquire small tracts, partial interest, to avoid the cumbersome state acquisition process. So we were still at that and doing that, recruiting in the meantime, trying to build our membership by direct mail. We went through an effort to everybody to get any kind of mailing lists they could get their hands on, so we could get the word out to potential members. And we grew the membership pretty quickly for the first year or two. And then once we got our first executive director, that effort was magnified, and we were pretty successful in getting a lot of the local folks that were interested in this to become members. That helped not just for financial reasons. The membership fees were pretty low, so we were not doing any sort of capital fundraising that was going to enable us to make acquisitions of large tracts or anything, but it would keep us operating. And within about, I think it was probably about a year and a half, we hired a grant writer to help us with a grant application, and then around the Epcot Foundation to hire an executive director, which we did in, I think it was 1984. Hired Jay Katner as our first executive director, and he was followed by a number of different very capable people in that position. So we continued on with supporting the state and collecting and closing on partial interest in a way of kind of getting the foothold over there so that the various parcels that were owned by a lot of different owners could not be marketed or sold or developed in any way without us being at the table. In fact, there was a while, and I think it finally went away, but there was a period of time where the state policies for acquisition of land were such that they could not acquire partial interest. So when that opportunity arose, we were the only game in town. When we were successful in finding somebody that could put together the ownership of the whole tract and make the transaction, we often were the ones that made the deal, obtained the option to purchase the property that would last long enough for the state to go through its acquisition process and take title when the time came. There was one kind of interesting early occurrence where we had the opportunity to buy some property, and I don't remember whether it was partial or full interest, but the state, for whatever reason, was not ready to go with it, and we borrowed money from the Nature Conservancy. They were very supportive and very helpful in making that transaction work. A few of the more interesting acquisition events. One was a friendly condemnation. I say friendly condemnation. The owners were perfectly happy to sell their property. They didn't want to do anything with it. They were more or less supportive of the effort, but they felt like the appraised value by the state's appraisers was not what it should be. So they said, well, why don't we, since we can't agree on a price, why don't we let a jury decide this? So the state filed a condemnation action. It proceeded along for a while with further negotiations. It was finally set for trial, and just a few weeks before the trial was to start, there was a storm. I don't think it was a hurricane, but it was a significant storm, and I'm not sure who it was. Somebody obtained some video of this particular tract being overwashed by the ocean, almost the entire 8,000 feet or so of that tract. So when the other side saw that, they figured maybe the price that the state had offered was okay after all, and that ended up being resolved. Yeah, again, another interesting transaction involved the owner of one of the tracts on the north end who applied for a CAMA permit, a Coastal Area Management Act permit, to build a house served by a septic tank and a well, along with a pier for access along that shoreline that is now so heavily used by the public for access to the island. That case resulted in the permit application was denied, and I suspect it was kind of a gray area as to whether the denial was really legit or not. The property owner appealed the denial, and for whatever reason, prior to the case being decided, they decided to drop their appeal. When those kind of situations happen, you always suspect that it may have been somebody that was just trying to make a point and get the price up a little bit to show that, in fact, you can develop this island, and it's that the values of the land are more than the state is saying that they are. Another interesting occurrence was in 1996. There was another CAMA permit application filed for development on one of the spoil islands along the Intracoastal Waterway. That was part of the reserve, and it again kind of caught people by surprise. First of all, that some of these spoil islands were privately owned, or at least claimed to be privately owned, even though they were, most of them were subject to an easement for the Intracoastal Waterway, there was a significant amount of high ground outside of the easement that was suitable in some instances for kind of a rudimentary development. This was of particular significance to the folks at UNCW's Center for Marine Science down on Murray Sound, because it was right across from their facility. And one of the owners, not the one that applied for a permit, but one of the owners of 3 tracks, happened to be a professor in the business school at UNCW. So he didn't make a lot of friends, I don't think, with that. But he and the others ultimately agreed to sell their interest. It was at a time when the federal funding was not available and state funds were not available from the normal sources. And the acquisition was made by a grant from the Natural Heritage Trust Fund. We were the ones that, the society was the one that negotiated that deal and got an option to purchase those properties, which were then, the transaction was then closed by the state. The last of the notable acquisitions or interesting stories that I want to suggest to you is another friendly condemnation action. This was when things had slowed down to the point where there was really no acquisition activity going on. Again, in 1996, the state condemned the last large tract of land on the north end, or the largest remaining tract, I should say. And that proceeded on to, and ultimately went to a trial. The award from the jury was significantly more than the state had estimated and the state's appraisals had shown. And that effectively depleted all of the funds that had been set aside for acquisition. So the state was kind of out of the acquisition business at that point. And the acquisition business had really pretty much dried up. There were just not any other sellers, or potential sellers out there that seemed to be willing to negotiate. In 1997, that case was in 1997. The society continued on in existence, obviously, and we were there and available and occasionally contacting property owners to see if they may have changed their mind or if there'd been a change of ownership due to the death in the family or something like that. We were trying to kind of keep things alive, but it was apparent that all of our dues for our members were really going towards paying a fee for or a salary for a part-time executive director and keeping books and filing things and doing things to stay in existence, but really not accomplishing much of what our mission was. It occurred to us after a while of going along that path that it really didn't make much sense for us to continue to exist. We really had no role in management. We were doing some educational things that were nice, but really not what we originally started out to do. And it didn't take long to figure out that we had a perfect opportunity to continue this process by merging with the North Carolina Coastal Land Trust, which was, as everybody on this call I'm sure knows, an up and going and very successful and well-organized organization that was going to be here forever and already had an inventory of land, already had experts in land acquisition, and it just seemed to be the perfect opportunity to take what we had left while we still had some assets and merge with them and let the Coastal Land Trust continue their effort. And almost exactly 20 years after we were established. The merger was completed in it was September of 2003, and we've lived happily ever after. And that concludes what I'm prepared to say. And of course, we'll be entertaining questions through the chat mechanism. Stephanie is going to be the one that screens those and lets me know if we have any questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions in the group chat. So one of them is all of Masonboro Island protected now?
The answer is no. Statistics, actually, Jessica and some of the folks at Coastal Land Trust may have the exact figures here, but there's still a few tracks, I think maybe 12 different tracks that are not completely owned. It doesn't amount to a lot of acreage. There's still some partial interest in some tracks that are privately held. It's upwards of 90%, I think, now. Jessica, is that, you can nod if that's about right. Yeah.
And this question would either be for you, I guess, Bill, or maybe Camilla. What is like the Coastal Land Trust role with Masonboro Island? So after the merger.
I'm going to pass that to Jessica. We do some acquisitions as they arise, but primarily we are assisting in being one of the partners and advisors on the management of Masonboro by the state. Jessica, would you like to take it from there?
So the Coastal Land Trust does stay actively involved on the local advisory committee, and Bill Raney does sit on that as well. And I see Hope Sutton on here, so she puts up with all of us, where we are advisors, but we don't make the actual management decisions. The Coastal Land Trust also is always considering working towards the remaining pieces that are not in state ownership yet. However, those opportunities are pretty few and far between. So we are poised to act on them when the time comes. And we have reached out to owners in the past and sort of plan to do so as things change, or as in a reactive way if we hear that there's some potential for acquisition. So it's on our radar. It's something we're still interested in as a partner. And we like to stay involved and understand what's happening out there, but it's not as active as when the original acquisition was occurring.
How many members did the society have when you were standalone?
And we were very fortunate to have executive directors at the right times during our existence. We got started, we pretty quickly within a few months had about 400 members. When Jay Kattner left, Richard Walthney, who was a Wilmington native, does not live here anymore, but he had moved back here for a short time. He had been a board member and had some time, and was a part-time executive director. And his focus, he had been involved in some other nonprofit organizations. His focus was building membership, and within about a year, we had 1,500 members. So we grew very quickly, and I'm sure those numbers dwindled over the years as the activity was less, but we had a pretty good membership at one time.
Well, as somebody that plays a lot in the database here at the Coastal Land Trust, I can tell you that many of those people are hanging tight as members of the Land Trust and identified as originally coming from the Society for Masonboro Island. That's really fun to see those renewals come through every year. So if you're on the call, thank you. We appreciate you. I think that there's an opportunity. If you have a question but you haven't put it in the chat, feel free to unmute and ask it. We'll see if that works with the audio issues we're having. But please do feel free to ask. Hope Sutton, I wanted to give you a little special shout out. Thanks for joining the call today. I don't know if you want to take a moment to unmute and kind of give us a little introduction with you and your role with Masonboro at the moment.
Well, gosh, I wasn't,
It's a surprise.
didn't realize I was going to get put on the spot here, but I mean, all I really have to say is that, you know, the state, you know, as this, so for those of you who don't know, I am the stewardship coordinator for the North Carolina Coastal Reserve, and one of the sites that I have the direct management responsibility for is the Masonboro Island site. And I spend an awful lot of my time and effort thinking about Masonboro. And I'm also a longtime recreational user, so I've been benefiting from public access to that site for about 30 years now. But I mean, I guess the main thing I would say in reference to the subject today is just we all on the state side feel very fortunate for all of the efforts in the early days of the folks that really took on this challenge of protecting this site. And we feel very fortunate that it ended up in, you know, becoming the, excuse me, becoming the 4th site of the National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I don't know how many people realize what that really means, but that does mean that there is federal protection in addition to the state protection for that site, and a variety of programs that happen on that site that link that island and the surrounding ecosystems with a national program that is in almost every state around the whole coast of the country. So anyway, we really appreciate everything that the Society did and that the Coastal Land Trust continues to do to support the site and our work to continue to take care of it.
Thank you very much for being such a great partner with us. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I did want to give you a minute because it has taken a partnership to make this happen. Last call, if there are any other questions. If not, I'd love to give Camilla a minute as well as one of the partners that has made this all happen, and give you a second to.
Thank you, Stephanie, and Hope, I have the advantage of you because Stephanie told me that she was going to call on me today. But we're just, it's so wonderful for me to see all these faces and names of longtime conservationists, not only associated with the Society, but also with the Coastal Land Trust here. And, you know, Bill has such a modest and kind demeanor. You would not expect that he is a real conservation superstar, but let's just face it, he is a real conservation superstar in this state. And he has worked for the Attorney General's office as an attorney before coming back here to enter into private practice. While there, he defended our state from all things that were unkind and nasty to the environment. He not only started the Society for Masonboro, and it wasn't just that he was one of the co-founders, he did all the legal work, and I can hardly even explain to you how many boxes of file folders of partial interests of land up and down Masonboro Island and title searches in hundreds, thousands of hours of volunteer legal time that he devoted to this. He will tell you it's a team effort, and I'm sure that it was, but I will tell you that he was the backbone behind the acquisition work for the Society. And then after all of that, he was willing to join me, Michael Murkison, and Chuck Rowe, who I think is also on this call, as one of the 4 co-founders of the Coastal Land Trust. He was on our original board. He was one of our original presidents, if not the original president. And so I cannot tell you enough about Mr. Bill Raney. He is one of my heroes. He's the person that I have always gone to when there was a conservation issue that I couldn't figure out myself. An hour or 15 minutes sometimes, even with Bill Raney, would put me in the right direction. So our state is the beautiful state that it is today here at the coast, in part because of Bill Raney. So Bill, I missed your 70th birthday party or 65th or whatever else, but I've been meaning to give that tribute to you for an awful long time. So thank you so much. And I'd say unmute yourselves, guys, or give the round of applause, please, to Mr. Bill Raney.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks again, Bill. This was really cool. I appreciate you hanging in there with us with the audio issues. But we really appreciate your time and sharing that history and that story with us today. For those of you on the call who may not have been to a Little Lunch lecture before, just wanted to let you know this is a weekly thing. And we have lectures scheduled all the way through September at this point. And they're always at noon on Fridays, and they're always free, and you can always invite your friends. So wanted to let everybody know that next 2 lectures, September 4th will be one of our board members, LeVay Wallace Singleton, is the executive director of the Veterans Employment Base Camp and Organic Garden in New Bern. That benefits veterans and provides fresh produce to the New Bern community. And we'd love to have you join us and learn a little bit more about that organization. And then on September 11th, Bonnie Monteleone from the Plastic Ocean Project will be with us to discuss her research on marine debris and talk a little bit about why plastic is more than a marine life threat and how to flatten the plastic curve. We're talking a lot about flattening curves these days, and ocean plastic is another one of those that we need to kind of take a look at. So join us September 11th for that talk. If you've missed any and you'd like to go back and listen, all of our Little Lunch lectures are on our website at coastallandtrust.org/lectures. I think that will go in the chat here in just one second. And again, if you love Little Lunch lectures, if you love Masonboro Island, if you love the Coastal Land Trust, if you love other places that we've saved, please consider becoming a member or renewing your membership by giving a donation. You can do that online securely anytime. And the link is going to be in the chat. Sign up for our e-news and stay in touch with us. We'd love to have you come along as a friend first if you're not quite ready to be a member. But again, thank you for being here today. Look forward to seeing you next week. And have a great weekend, everybody. Again, thank you, Bill. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
No problem. See everybody soon.